signal to start. So, here's what I don't have. I don't have video. I don't dig holes. I have no graphs. This project is ongoing. We picked up surveys today that we are just getting started on this thing. And I have no GPS tracks. So what we're going to take a look at, and really in the form of questions and sort of how I think about this stuff, is taking a look at some very cursory survey data that I'm picking up from people. So Jordi and I are working on this up at ISSW in Anchorage. You probably all looked at the new PEEPS vector, which had a GPS, which was a transceiver with a GPS built into it. So we were standing around drinking beer going, well, this is kind of a cool thing. One instrument does multiple functions. Well, as it turns out, it doesn't do any functions. They pulled it off the market. But that's exactly what gave us the idea for this. What if we could put radio collars on skiers and virtually follow them around and then ask them questions? So that's kind of the genesis of this thing. So this is kind of an example of the end product that we're looking for, and this is our, in general, research question. How do backcountry skiers use a combination of terrain and hazard assessment, and then to move safely through the backcountry, and then how do we integrate, or can we integrate, some of these human factors that people talk about? Jordi is obviously interested. He's got a specialty in this area, and I have a specialty in this area. So it's pretty complementary. And this is an example of what we're trying to do. As you move across the landscape, we can track you with those black satellites that are in the sky. And then we know where you've been, right? As long as you voluntarily participate. So, first, shout out to Carl here, because he sent around messages to all the avalanche centers to help announce this thing, and we thought, the people that tag into the centers for the reports are the natural people to help participate in the study. And the study is very, very simple, and it's all done on your smartphone, which means we no longer have to issue GPS units to people. Sign up and take a preseason survey. Look at that announcement, follow the hot link. Right, so I have a preseason survey where basically I want to know who you are. I want to know your areas of expertise. I'd like to know where you are, a few general things, and most importantly, I'd like to know how you make decisions. And there's tons of literature on this. We have some great scales that we can use that I can ask you to complete and try to draw some conclusions out about your decision-making process that is obviously correlated with personality traits and demographic traits. Then you spend 99 cents and you go out and buy this Ski Tracks app. How many people are using Ski Tracks? It's a very popular app. There's only 3 people in here. It's not very popular. Maybe it's the price. But this is what the interface looks like on your phone. It really does work well. It's designed one version for mountain biking, one version for downhill skiing. But one of the beauties of this is it tells us both the up track and the down track. Right? And then we can take that thing, save it, and drape it on Google Earth so you can brag to your friends your vertical for the day and where you went. So we're actually working with them now to adapt this to a backcountry app because we want to have our survey data embedded in the application so that you can do it in real time. Then you go skiing. That's the fun part. You record the track. You email us the track at the end of the day, and then you are pinged immediately with a very short daily log survey. So it's a survey designed specifically or tagged specifically towards that day's tour. Okay, so this is very simple. You only have to do the preseason once, and then every time you submit a track, you submit another survey to us. All right. And that survey right now resides in a thing I'm sure you're all familiar with, an electronic survey package called SurveyMonkey. Dead easy to design surveys, dead easy to complete them. They work on multiple platforms. So the costs of participation in this thing are very, very low, we think, for people. 99 cents, most people can afford that. And we have a few pairs of gloves to give away from Black Diamond at the end of the year. So that's nice. So here's our thinking on this. As we move through the landscape, there are these discrete decision points. Often when we're on skis, we can just put our head down and plow on. There's nothing to really think about. Then we come to these points where maybe there's an inflection in the slope, maybe there's a barrier, maybe we hear a whoomp, right? Maybe we stop and dig a pit, have a discussion. There's these discrete decision points on almost any tour that are by and large driven by the topography, right? Whether it's your location, you find yourself in a strange spot, maybe there's some possible terrain trap that you have to figure out how to move around. The assumption is, maybe this is a big assumption, that rational people will then engage in some conversation. Right? And that's a good question, the amount of communication that groups have throughout the day. What is the nature of that conversation? So they have to make a decision. There are demographic issues associated with how we make decisions. We're all familiar with my 22-year-old who has a very different brain chemistry going on than I do. He responds to a whole bunch of what we call psychographic variables, the excitement. He's discovering a new sport. He's in a new place. I'm in the same old place. I've been doing this a long time. He wants to go ski the big lines. I could care less. Right? Then there's this thing that happens with the groups. Right? So you get this group of 22-year-olds with that different brain thing going on. There's a different energy going on than me and my old friends, right? Sort of plodding on a flatter trail. And we're all familiar with this. We're all familiar with demographic predictors of behavior, with psychographic predictors of behaviors, values and hopes, and then these group dynamics. So what I'm trying to do is capture those things in the survey. Right? And here's the problem. I don't have someone like you who's been doing this since the dawn of time to help me. Since before there was snow. Right? So there's not much literature to draw on. The literature that I'm drawing on comes from risk management, it comes from the medical community, the aviation community, but there's been sort of a thin literature on human factors in the avalanche world. That's not good for me, because I have to reinvent some wheels here, or invent some wheels, and we don't know how good we are at it yet. So you make that decision point, you execute that decision, and then the loop starts again as you move through the landscape and more of these decision points. So we think geography and topography spark these decision points and the conversation follows later. That's our logic to that thing. So here's, right now, as of yesterday, 215 people have signed up for this study doing the preseason survey, what we call the preseason survey, the one-time survey. And I noticed got a few tracks last night, probably got a few more today, so I think we're up around 170 tracks total. So those are individual GPS tracks submitted by people who have signed up. I know for a fact one person has given us 15 tracks. Right, so some people are out there really engaged in this, others not so much, and some people have signed up and they haven't sent us anything. That's fine. So far, we have several countries represented, and as far as I can see, all the ski centers in the West, at least. I don't know that we have anyone from the East doing this yet, but I feel pretty good about that. So this is what we call a convenience sample. I can't compel people to do this. It's very difficult to know where they are. All I can do is hope to use the listservs and the contacts and generate some buzz and get people to sign up for this. So is there a response bias? Yeah, I kind of think there might be. I look at these numbers, however, and I go, well, 80% male, that makes about sense. Look around the room. 35 years old, that seems old, but I don't know. And we can't know because we don't know who's out doing these sports. 90% on skis, that sounds about right. 67% ski with a partner, at least one partner. And again, that kind of seems about right. You know, I think there's a lot of people in these places, especially maybe midweek, that go out by themselves. As a result, we have a lot of single person ski tracks out there, enough that eventually we're going to be able to analyze the behavior of single individuals versus groups, which I think would be really exciting. People certainly behave differently when they're by themselves. They are incredibly well educated when this backcountry ski crowd, when you compare them to the national population. Now that, again, that makes sense. It's not one of the cheaper sports to get started in. Where you do this sport typically are these high elevation resort kinds of communities or amenity-rich communities like Bozeman, where the cost of living can be pretty high. We know that places like Bozeman, Boulder, Jackson have very high levels of social capital. So this makes some sense to me. Right? And it's exactly half and half, at least last time I looked at the data, 50-50 married single. Right? Again, it makes sense. Look around the room. They participate in a lot of other sports. They're well-rounded outdoors people. Right? Again, it makes sense. No one specializes in backcountry skiing. It's usually complementary to sort of these lifestyle choices that we make to pursue recreation year-round. And measured by where they do this, how they do it, and a suite of variables, they seem very experienced at it. A lot of the people in the database have been at this a very long time. In fact, long enough that I'm starting to think if there's a bias, that's where the bias is showing up. I do not see, I don't see as many novice skiers in this database, which I think we know how to get around that eventually. All right. So I asked them in the surveys, anyone take the survey, by the way? Anyone here signed up for the project? A couple of them? What kind of skier are you? What kind of skills do you have? How do you handle expert terrain? Well, everyone's an expert, right? And I have some scale questions built in here that I can eventually do some jiggery pokery with and try to build a single numerical value broad-based scale on skiing. Because I asked the same questions in several different ways. I haven't done that yet, but everyone tells me they're an expert. Right? Most people tell me they're very proficient with the tools of the trade, right? Particularly the transceiver, with terrain management. So I'm really optimistic. I look at a data set like this and I go, I'm not going to see much in the way of mistakes. I'm going to see smart people doing smart things, which is exactly what I hope to find. That's what I want. I don't want to find failure. I want to find the good news story. I don't know how this compares with your experience in teaching avalanche classes, but that's a pretty cool trend. 65. Now, again, that might be response bias. I might only be pulling people who have signed up for avalanche courses because they're on somebody's mailing list. Because they've had an avalanche course, they've been exposed to the forecast centers. So they go to the forecast center, that's where they saw the study. So these are the kinds of things I get really concerned about. If I'm attracting a narrow band of respondents to my surveys, I have a problem, and I need to figure out a way around that. But I'll do that. I'll figure that out. Right? And this one absolutely blows me away. All right? Because if you look at studies in other countries, it's nowhere close to that. I've been looking at studies from Italy, studies from Sweden, European countries. The Euros are not carrying the same level of gear that we are, at least the respondents to this survey. So that's pretty cool. Again, I'm hopeful that I'm going to see good things, which again is what I'm looking for. One of the things, and this really comes from Kirk's influence and us skiing together, is this idea of doing pre-trip planning. You know, communication is all well and good during the day, but communication should start when you say, let's go skiing, right? Well, where? What's the weather been? What's the hazard? How long do you want to go out for? How spunky do you want to get with it, right? All that is sort of all bound up in the same conversation, and that conversation is best if it starts early, right? So we're asking those questions. Again, because there's no baseline numbers, I don't know if that's a good number or a bad number. We all know we'd like to see that 100%. Everyone is having that conversation in some form at the beginning of the tour, right? We know that's not happening. We know there's probably some form of conversation taking place, but in terms of a discrete pre-trip kind of conversation, 65% of me are telling, you know, that they've done that. They've checked the weather. They've checked the avalanche hazard. It seems a little low to me. Again, I don't know. Some of the centers have hit rates that they measure. You guys, I think, measure your hit rates. We might be able to tease some of that out with that data and say, well, this kind of fits. This appears to be about right. This one was interesting because very few people. I'm doing another project with Kirk using the new BCA radios, and so I'm kind of focused on communication this year. And very few discuss their communication strategy as reported from the question in the response to the question. In other words, we're not saying, okay, what are we going to do when you get down there out of sight? How do we signal that you're in the clear? Are you going to ski out of sight? They're not having that conversation. Right? And we can't see that in the tracks because not everyone is running ski tracks in this group. In other words, we don't have multiple tracks for the group. Right? So we don't know how they behave because the tracks have a timestamp. So when this person skis this pitch, we have a timestamp. We could, if multiple people carried their cell phones with this running, we could look at the duration between skiers on that, which would be kind of interesting. Right? Even fewer are making snowpack assessments, and I'm seeing very, very few. And I didn't bring up numbers here because I don't want to get bogged down in numbers. We're not all that sure of the results yet. The study's not done. All I can tell you is I'm not seeing snowpack assessment at all. Experts, intermediate, novices, not seeing it. Hand pits, that's it. But several of the assessment things that we're talking about, like RACH blocks, zero, never. You know, a lot of ski cuts, which I think we also call the first turn, right? And then hand pits. The escape routes, that sort of thing, people don't seem to be considering it. And like I said, we have all regions. So we'll be able to tease out regional differences in here. So we know something about these people. Again, I don't know how valid this sample is because we don't have the baseline data to draw on. We don't have a census of backcountry skiers. But I can tell you how most people are behaving. Most people are skiing terrain they're very familiar with. Right? Which makes sense, right? We try to squeeze in a day here and there. We try to squeeze in a weekend. We're skiing places that we know. I am going to be looking in the tracks then for perhaps those familiarity mistakes that we often fall into. Well, I've been to Mount Ellis 6 times this year. The 7th time is going to be just like the previous 6, right? Until I see that 6-foot crown you're done, right? Most have a goal. Most have an idea of where they want to end up at the end of the day. Right? We'll come back to that. Most ski with people they know and people they trust. Now, when I first saw this, I went, that's a good thing. Right? You should ski with people that you trust. And I'll show you some quotes out of the survey in a few minutes. If you're skiing with people that you trust, and you have a goal, we presume we're on the same page here. Right? We can remain pretty committed to that goal, especially if we've had that conversation. Another thing I'm going to be looking for in this survey data is that a slippery slope? And I've got a couple quotes I think that indicate maybe it is a slippery slope. You can trust the people you're with maybe too much, right? Especially if we hand up decision making to that person who we consider more charismatic, more experienced, or simply they're a little bit more stoked to ski something than you are that particular day. They're telling me in this data that once they set that goal, they rarely reassess that goal. Don't know yet what causes that when they do reassess that goal, but I've asked some questions about snowpack, weather, turnaround time. I would expect that, again, rational skiers that want to stay out of potentially risky situations track that sort of thing. And we'll know that through the data. Right? In other words, people make a plan and they try to stick to that plan, which again, those of you who are familiar with the decision-making literature is perfectly expected. Right? Why is that? Because our self-esteem is bound up in that. What are you going to do today? I'm going to go ski Gallatin Peak. You show up the next day. What'd you do yesterday? Ski Gallatin Peak? Well, no, not really. We kind of pussed out. Right? Well, no one likes to admit that. And that's human nature. And that's going to be associated with certain demographic traits. Certain demographic traits and people that have certain personality traits are going to express that at a much higher rate than other people. We're going to be able to tease that out. Right? So the point here is that we're really getting, I think, close to looking not only at regional differences, but actual personality differences in skiing. Not all skiers behave the same. Which suggests to me, not all skiers, or there may be certain types of skiers that are more prone to getting into trouble than others, is the way I'll put it. Intermediate skiers tend to ski with less familiar people. Now, again, this makes perfect sense. I think this says something to avalanche educators in here. The expert skiers, they're already hooked up. They have friends, they have a core group of friends, they trust them, they make decisions together, they're off skiing. Right? The novices are probably not initiating trips. Hopefully they're being asked on trips by more experienced people, but these kids, and I see them at MSU all the time, you know, they come into MSU, they get a pair of skis, I'm taking every one class, I'm getting out half a dozen, 10 times a year, but I want to kick it up a bit, and I'm not sure who now to go skiing with. Right? These intermediate people, because they're probably hooking up with less familiar people, may be at more risk. That's something avalanche educators might want to address. Right? Choosing partners. You know, who are you going to go skiing with? Novice skiers aren't having the conversation at all. They're reporting, and we're talking zero here. Zero pre-trip planning, zero decision-making conversations during the day, which suggests, again, perfectly expected, I'm handing my responsibility or responsibility for my safety over to somebody else. No one in this room would do that. Yeah?
How are you defining expert, intermediate?
Oh, I've got a definition. I should have put it up here.
Okay. I mean, it seems to me like avalanche terrain is typically associated with like a black diamond ski run, which would make me think of most backcountry skiers are experts just by being able to go out.
They might be, although you can do a lot, and there are, I think, there might be a lot of variability by region. You know, the Wasatch, everything appears to be straight up and straight down, right? But you can do a lot of nice touring around here and have a lot of fun backcountry skiing and really ski moderate terrain all season long if you want to.
Yeah, you could have an expert skier that's a ranked novice in backcountry.
Yeah.
Right,
And that's why I measured this skier thing with a very complex scale. And it's simply not worth our time to talk about it. But I have a very complex scale that asks this in about 6 different ways.
You mean like their level of, like, as in terms of skiing, the sport?
Yes.
Expert.
Skiing backcountry terrain.
Right.
Your
Not in terms of avalanches.
no, not in terms of
Right.
avalanches, but in terms of just ski skills. Yeah. So the novices, I'm wondering. I want to know, and we asked them their avalanche education. I want to know if these people have had AVI classes. Right? If they've had AVI classes and they're not engaging their partners in these conversations, if they're just simply assigning away their safety, I think that's a problem. I think it's a potential problem. So here's some comments, and I just kind of got a kick out of it. A lot of people write comments at the end of the survey. Right? This is kind of a long one, but at the start of the day, we were going to ratchet things back based on hazard. We're going to stay under 30 degrees. Right? We skied powder sub 30 all morning. Heard some whoops, talked about it, right? Communicated within the group. But on the way home, I'm assuming it was on the way out, I center punched this slope between the trees where no wind slab was observed and consequences deemed small and manageable, right? And that's kind of that smelling the barn, right? Smelling the barn idea. At the end of the day, do we make, and we'll be able to see this in the tracks, at the end of the day, did we make a different set of decisions from the start of the day? Right? Did we get tired and shortcut? We'll be able to test for some of those questions. Right? Strange day of group dynamics. Group dynamic wise, with a couple less frequent skiing partners, differing opinions, poor decision making. Well, there's the classic right there. Right? Things just didn't gel today. Right? What could we have done to gel that day as a group? I would look to you guys for that and look to avalanche educators to address that in classes. Let's ski down with our headlights into a large 30-35 degree slope, a little bit too far, kind of overshot. Right? Starting to ski, we stopped before the roll over the slope and did a hand pit. Again, we're on our way home. Hand pit will do. Found it safe enough, so I hauled ass down the slope, overshooting cracks. I wouldn't do it again. So I'm very interested to see how their terrain choices during the day, and maybe this is a big deal, our terrain choices during the day erode through the day. We're tired, taking those shortcuts back to the car, I want to get home, there's cold beer in the fridge. Let's go. Right? So, here's where we're going with this. And I apologize that we don't have the track data out here for that. Comparison among demographic groups. Groups of novices, groups of intermediates, mixed groups, mixed gender groups, a lot of the things that McCammon has talked about. High trust and high familiarity. Are their terrain choices different than people who are skiing in less familiar terrain? We would expect certainly they are, and if the literature is correct, they're probably making riskier terrain choices. Right? When you're in your own backyard, you feel more comfortable perhaps taking a risk. We need more novice skiers signing up. We don't have very many. Right? And I'm really interested to know how novices behave differently than intermediate and experts. We know they do. We just don't know to what degree. All right. Commitment and terrain, that's a big one. All right. By God, we're going somewhere. It's very important to us. I've rated that goal. I've stated that goal and rated achieving that goal very high. What gets me to turn around? Am I as likely to pursue that goal on a high hazard day as a moderate hazard day? Okay. Expert skiers, probably so. Is that a problem for expert skiers? I don't know. Right? But the point is, we don't know the answers to any of these questions so far. What regional differences? This is one that really fascinates me because, you know, having skied in several different places, some places, you know, you go visit, those guys are amped up. Right? And we all know, we've all visited some of those places. In all these places seem to have a core group of very charismatic sort of local heroes that people look up to, and young kids like to emulate their heroes. To what degree is that important in shaping our behavior? That one really fascinates me. I don't know what the baseline area is. I don't know what the wildest area is, but I know there are different ski cultures, and I think it's really important that we understand these different ski cultures if we're interested in sort of mitigating or minimizing accidents, because I kind of believe different kinds of accidents probably have a geographical tag to them because of the local ski culture. That's something local people might want to know. And then finally, the McCammon traps, and again, this is part of this project that's really kind of near and dear to me. Ian McCammon did some great work. He looked at 700 accidents. Everybody in this room is familiar with those articles. He looked at 700 accidents over time, and he describes a half dozen traps, decision-making traps that we all fall into. And those are well recognized in the decision-making literature, from medicine to aviation to virtually everywhere. Here's the problem. He looked at 700 cases of failure. I'm convinced most people out there, I hope most people out there, are not failing. These are smart, successful, well-educated people. By all accounts, at the level 1 level, they're avalanche educated. I fully expect them to be doing smart things, making good choices. This is, I guess, my personal soapbox, and I'd be interested in your reaction to this, all of your reactions to this. The problem with the focus on the McCammon literature is it is by and large looking at the negative. We have focused, as people interested in avalanche accidents, on what people do wrong. As a result, we've given less attention to what people are doing right. Most people aren't dying in avalanches. Very few people are dying in avalanches. That tells me most people have figured this out to some extent. I want those lessons, not the failure lessons. Right? So I'm trying to really shift the orientation. There's a lot of lip service given to studying human factors. I notice there's not a lot of people doing it, right? It's more fun to go play in the snow. I'm totally on that. But I'd really like to see this literature shift to a more positive view of our behavior, because most of us are not behaving stupidly, right? So that's kind of what I'm bringing to this. We'll be processing our tracks this summer. Hopefully, maybe we'll be invited back. You can get Yordi up here to talk about the tracks. We'll be able to lay these surveys in here. But this is a pretty exciting project, and of the three or four of you in here that are signed up, good on you. Thanks. The rest of you. All right.
Thanks a lot, Jeff.
Thanks.